Hey guys, welcome back to Results Junkies podcast. Sorry about missing out on recording last week, but we are back here live and in the flesh, strapped into our microphones and ready to talk about all the things in the investing world. We've got a story on tap about Apple having AI having its iPhone moment. Some interesting trends coming out of Y Combinator and how those companies are raising money. But I also want to start with a couple of questions about PointsPath for Paul. Mr. Singh, how the heck are you?
Juggling chainsaws this week, that's for sure. I feel bad. We have not missed an episode in 3 years, I don't think. That probably tells you how crazy your schedule and mine were this week or last week. No comment further than that.
I do like how we referred there, because I do recall being left at the altar a couple of times with the lights on and the microphone ready to go and Paul going, "Sorry, Ed."
Oh, Jeremiah, I hope you can cue up some sad violin music. But you're right. There were a couple times over the last couple days where I've sent you a text 3 minutes before we were going to record saying something came up.
Yeah. Well, and I've got all kinds of memes from our favorite meme follower, and I apologize to him for not having any queued up for the show. A couple from Jeremiah too, so we will get all that queued up for next week. But I want to start with just a couple of things on PointsPath, and I think first at a high level, just to remind folks, I'm trying to invest in at least 10 travel startups a year for the next 5 years, or travel adjacent startups as well. And PointsPath is actually one of the ones that I am investing in, that we're investing in as a company. If you are a travel startup or thinking about getting into that space and want to talk to us about your concept, you can email show@resultsjunkies.com. You can find me on social media at Pizza in Motion, and you can find him on all those same places at Paul Singh. So just to recap for folks, PointsPath is a product that it's a Chrome, well, I guess it's more than a Chrome extension now because it's also a Microsoft Edge and they're working on Safari, but it's an extension, the browser extension that works with Google Flights to tell you what the points price is for a specific flight. So, Paul, you like to go to the islands. It would show you Dulles to St. John or something like that. And it would tell you what the cash price of the flight was, which Google Flights already does that. And then it would show you the points price. And there are some other things coming down the pike for the product, but at its basic level, what's helping folks do is tell them the points price for a flight, and also give them some level of direction. Hey, this is a good deal. This is a bad deal. You should use cash. You should use points. So as you well know, and this isn't, to be clear, I'm 100% not picking on you when I say this. I just think you represent a really good use case for this. For years on the tech tour, I tried to get you to change credit cards because I felt like you were in the wrong card for the city you lived in, the airline that you flew. But PointsPath connected something for you. And now that I've seen this happen with a handful of folks, there's this group of people in my life that fall into two categories that all end up in the same place. There's some folks who we co-invest with, which you fall into that category. And then some fellow franchisees and Five Guys who, really smart folks, bunch of credit card spend, end up with a bunch of points, but never really take the time to understand what they're worth. And PointsPath has made that connection for them. And I'm curious, maybe this sounds like an overly obvious question, but when PointsPath made that connection, it sort of feels like there's one of two things. Either PointsPath made it easier for you because you felt like you were getting direction on the right way to use your points, and you didn't really care if they were worth 1.5 cents a piece or 2 cents a piece, or maybe it was something else and it really did force you to think about them as a currency. And I'm curious, like with this product, do you see it as like it's making the decision for you and it's making it easier, or was it the thing that made your mind start thinking about points like a currency?
We might take a hard tangent on this episode today because I have a lot of thoughts on this.
Did I trigger you already?
Well, so let me start by saying that PointsPath did not make the connection for me. The connection for me was made. Okay, so for my situation in particular, for those of you that don't know, I've got 4 kids. My oldest is 10, my youngest is 18 months or 20 months now. But one of the big life changes that occurred for us in the last 2 years is that we had to start paying for our second oldest to start flying. So,
that first 2 years,
kids, kids fly free for 2 years. Disney's cheap. Everything's cheap relatively, right?
Yeah.
So for me in my life situation, at first, points they held no value to me. And
Hmm.
if I look backwards in time, with the clarity of hindsight, for the last 25, 30 years of my adult life, I've just never really thought about the points. They just seem like this thing that's there to kind of maybe keep it sticky
Yeah, yeah.
with the product, and I never really thought about it. And then as Henry, my second, turned 2, and we started having to pay for flights and pay for hotels for him, then I think I had this kind of like, then, in the back of your mind, you're like, oh man, travel's starting to get more expensive. That's probably around the time when, everything you had been saying started to resonate with me. And then all of a sudden the third kid hits 2, and now the fourth kid's going to hit 2 here pretty soon. So somewhere in the last year or two is really when I had that awakening of, hey, these points are worth something.
Right.
And then there was something in one of your other episodes with Miles to Go, I think, or maybe it was one of your reels or something like that. You had at some point casually mentioned like how I think it was like one of the things you had mentioned was like the airlines hold this many miles in terms of dollars on their books or something like that. To
Right.
you, it was, you said it so cavalierly, like you knew that. I think all the travel guys know that. In my mind, I was like, well, wait a second. So there's a dollar value for these miles. There's a dollar value for these credit card points. Like something else that
Yep.
you say very cavalierly because you know this stuff is you say something like, we're aiming for credit card points to be redeemed at about 2 cents a point. I think that's something you say pretty often.
I do. Yeah, I think it's a
And
good barometer, and I'll explain why when you're done.
right. And so I started to have these like, I look at my points balance, I log in to pay my Amex or I log into United and I see these miles. I'm like, wait a second, there's real value there. So now you've kind of, all these things kind of came together to make me realize that there was value. And then I found myself in that weird predicament of, well, how in the world do I utilize them? And
Right.
that's where Points Path comes in because, you know, you like, and I say this with all the respect in the world, you know this stuff inside and out. To you, it's actually so simple, I think, to figure out, okay, I'm going to take this routing and I'm going to just, that fare and I'm going to move these points. And to you, it's so easy, so trivial that you don't think anything of it. To me, it feels like a lot of friction. I'm changing a diaper, I'm answering a call, I'm doing these things. And that's where Points Path, like all of a sudden, made it really easy for me. It fits right into my flow. I go
Hmm.
to Google Flights, pick the right one, click through to the airline, boom, boom, boom. But, the nice thing is it just tells you. So I know I just kind of rambled there. Let me pause, but I do want to put a placeholder and maybe mention something about how I would grow Points Path from here based on my story. But let me pause there for a second.
Well, yeah, and I think so. You mentioned a couple of things. First off, the 2 cents per mile, and I want to explain why I think about that number. It has, oddly enough, nothing to do with flying. It has to do with some one really basic tenet about the credit card world, which I think you and most of the people listening know. It's pretty easy to get 2% cash back on regular standard credit card and do nothing. Set it and forget it. Spend $100 this month, you get $2 back in your account. So if that's easy to achieve, and we're not getting that much value out of our points and miles, i.e., if we're not getting 2 cents for a mile, then we're not getting a 2% rebate, and we just shouldn't play the game. So that's why I use 2% or 2 cents as a guideline.
Yeah.
Now, it's not a hard and fast guideline because, as you well know, there are plenty of bonus categories that the credit cards use to incentivize us. It's like, well, we give you 5 points per dollar on dining. Well, okay, if I'm getting 5 points per dollar, then I don't need to get 2 cents per point, assuming I couldn't get that same, couldn't cash that same point out for cashback. So, you also mentioned talking about like outstanding miles. And yeah, I mean, the airlines have billions of outstanding miles on their balance sheets. And I think one of the interesting things about their business model, and this gets back to how folks could potentially disrupt it and why it's hard to disrupt in this space. So going back to the pandemic, it's not the first time that the airlines have done this, but the airlines, so you'll use United in particular, they borrowed massive amounts of money from their primary banks, merchant banks. So United has a relationship with Chase. And so they borrowed money from Chase, and part of that borrowing was advanced purchase of miles. And so those miles now are, as you well know, those miles are a liability. They'll sit on United's balance sheet
Right.
until they're redeemed by someone or until the airline's able to write some portion of those miles off. And so
Right.
what makes it tough for folks to disrupt in this space is, well, United's not going to switch credit card partners. They're bound to Chase at such a, root level based on how many miles are sitting on their balance sheet that Chase has pre-purchased at a number of different intervals along the way. And so it can be very tough for travel startups to disrupt this space because of these entrenched relationships, things like the banking relationships, the global distribution systems, things like that, which is why I've never really been, up until recently, been interested in trying to disrupt the space, because it's been difficult. Some things have happened recently that make me think it's more disruptable today than ever. So that's why
Yeah.
we're focusing a little bit more there.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if this is the direction you want to go on this, but the novel thing, the novel the novel thing that PointsPath has done, I think, is figured out how to insert itself into the average user's flow much more interestingly than any other player I've seen in the space. And you certainly have more coverage on that industry than I do, but and this is public info right now, but as of this morning, Julian's reporting 32,000 weekly active users for a company that has raised nearly nothing.
Right.
And I think Julian's the only full-time employee of the company. So
Yep.
I think that goes to tell you, how many other people there might be like me. And in many ways, like if I was to, and again, full disclosure, like I have a vested interest now in them succeeding as well. But, I would say that they remind me a lot of Honey, Join Honey, which got
Yeah.
acquired by PayPal for $4 billion.
Yeah.
Certainly going to be a hard road to get there, but the fact is like there's a real need for something like this. So anyway, let me pause. Let's go any direction you want on this, because I definitely have some thoughts on this, and I think they could be tied to some broader trends I think we're seeing across consumer and B2B products.
Yeah, I'd love to hear those things. I think I would just say, collectively, just to give folks an understanding of what's out there. I pulled up the numbers for 2022, and collectively between the four biggest airlines, American, Delta, Southwest, and United, you're looking at $20 billion that they earned in 2022 off their loyalty programs.
Right.
20,
And that's just
20
the airlines. That doesn't take into account the credit cards, which arguably I would imagine are even more on the book, or have more points on the books, I would imagine.
Well, you've got all these transferable currencies that we talk about, Chase and American Express and stuff like that, membership rewards, Capital One. But, I think what I'm starting to see is, like one of the companies that I know some folks at, a company called Built. And you and I've talked a little bit about it, but Built is, a program that helps renters earn value out of their rent and help them potentially buy a house and stuff like that. But they're also in this points and miles space. And I think they're showing how somebody who's not associated with the airlines, like they don't have a partnership with a major airline specifically to issue cards for them, but they have all these transfer partners. And so they're finding a way to disrupt this space. And I think we're going to continue to see companies like think about this intuitively, because it's just such a massive marketplace. And because you can use these points for so many things now. So I think there's a lot more disruption to come in the space. And I think a lot of it comes in the form of a consumer like you who's very smart, but hasn't taken the time to, break down the value of the points and miles that they're earning. And there are lots of other things too, but like using you as an example, to you, whether you use points or miles, I think is probably immaterial. You're looking at how much it's going to cost you to get your family of 17 somewhere, right?
Right.
And so, if I could save you money on Disney hotels, you'd be just as happy as if I saved you money on airline tickets, because the cost of your trip goes down.
Right. Yes.
And so I think there's this consumer that's out there that's under addressed by the market, which is probably a poor way to say it. But I don't think, I think that, finding a way to help you plan that trip and save your family money is a very fragmented piece now. You got to go find an airline deal, you got to go find a hotel deal, then you got to go find a theme park ticket deal, and you got to find out how to save money on the $20 balloon. And I think there's a level of personalization that can come to this space to attract folks like you to say, yeah, I'm in, like, let me pay this fee or be a part of whatever program you've got, and you're going to help me plan my next trip in whatever way.
Well, yes, I agree. And I think I would say two things to this particular point you're making, I think. The first is that travel is aspirational. So even
Always,
if you can't go based on work or family obligations or financial reasons, there's still a significant number of internet users out there that are just looking to see. And that leads to, I think, the second interesting point about this is that, you know, once you've integrated yourself into that flow, that sort of browsing flow like PointsPath has done, you open yourself up to a lot of additional capabilities in terms of, let me give you an example actually. So, you know, Dana and I like to go to St. John in the Virgin Islands
Yep.
2 to 3 times a year, just the two of us. That's just like our place where we don't take the kids. It's just us. We're really fortunate to be able to do that. But the fact is that every time we do that, there's some additional purchases that we make on Amazon for battery packs or this or that or whatever.
Right.
And I think where it gets very fascinating for a company like PointsPath, and Julian's heard me like ramble about this to him multiple times, is that once they can associate the search with me, now all of a sudden they can start to recommend products for that destination. You know, the same thing with like, you know, hey, here's an Amazon affiliate link, for example, to a beach tent or something like that. So the point is though is that like there's just a lot of rich data there, and I think where PointsPath is going to really start to squeeze out big dollars in the long term, I bet, is going to be in the personalized recommendations for products, like affiliate revenue around recommended products for that trip, whether the trip was aspirational or not. You know, like whether the trip happens or not, you know, you might still want the beach hat for the pool this summer or something like that. So, and by the way, this is not a novel concept. I mean, just
Right.
imagine like, you know, I don't know, like maybe this says something about me, but I'll look something up on Amazon to price shop it. You know, I might
Right.
be at the
Right.
store, I'll price shop it on Amazon, and lo and behold, 8 hours later or something like that, I get an email that says, "Hey, we found other products you might like from Amazon." You know, so this happens. You know, and Amazon's making a ton of money off of this. Best Buy, all these companies do it, and they don't just do it to do it. They do it because it drives revenue.
For
So,
sure. For sure. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think like just to put a bow on this, and definitely something that I want to talk about more as we continue to find other companies to invest in. I think the moral of the story is, there are lots of ways to create a travel startup now. I think there's a big wave towards some level of personalization, some level of aided search, if you will. And I think that there are a number of ways to monetize those that are out there waiting for folks to pick those pieces up. And it goes to something that you said. I like to say, everybody dreams of going to Tahiti and then they redeem their miles for, Fort Lauderdale or Cancun. But like travel is one of the last aspirational things. We always, almost everyone dreams of that crazy, wonderful
yeah,
trip.
yeah.
And, whether you're helping somebody get to Tahiti or to Tacoma, I think there's a model there because there's a lot of translucency in the travel world. Well, how much is this ticket? When's it going to go up? When's it going to go down? How do I find hotel deals? And so I think
Well, it's not translucent; it's opaque. It's very
that's the
opaque.
word I was looking
Yeah,
for. Opaque.
yeah,
I'm struggling with my words today, Mr. Singh, and thank you for filling in. But I think that opacity leads to people getting frustrated.
right.
I had a good friend of mine who booked 2 tickets to Rome for a trip that he and his wife were taking, and he spent almost $5,000 on 2 coach tickets to Rome. And I'm like, holy dude, why didn't you call me? Like I could have saved you easily $2,000, but it was
Right.
just he got frustrated with the process. Well, I felt like I needed to buy the refundable ticket because
Yeah.
what if something happened? And then I probably needed some insurance, and then I had a seat, and it's like, oh man. But they make it difficult to sort through all these things, and
Yeah.
consumers feel like they need to buy some of this stuff, and that's where I think there's a lot of low hanging fruit there.
Well, I think last thing I'll say about this is that, one of the things I've noticed in the Amazon checkout flow recently, or not recently, but probably in the last year, is that I have never given Amazon my credit card login. But because I've
Interesting.
verified my Amex card with them,
Oh,
in
right.
the checkout
Okay.
flow,
Right.
it does give me the option to utilize my points,
Yeah, we talked
when I'm
about this.
doing an
Yeah.
Amazon purchase.
Right.
And I think that could be one very interesting angle in the long-term roadmap for something like PointsPath to do, is to like, it's probably in the credit card's best interest to not only play along nicely with somebody like PointsPath, but also maybe expose those kinds of APIs to PointsPath. Because let's just say your friend is looking for that flight to Rome. If they could burn, if the difference was 5K versus, hey, burn the available 33,000 points in your Amex and pay 3,000 in cash or something like that, I would imagine that's good for the consumer and really good for Amex, right? It's more
Yeah.
spend on the card. So
Yeah.
those APIs clearly exist. Now they're not
Oh, for
wide
sure.
open, but I think if PointsPath has gotten this far, like my bet is they're going to be at about 100,000 active users, weekly active users, I think by the end of the year. I would be surprised if they don't. And
Yeah.
as those numbers get bigger and bigger and bigger, I think it becomes harder and harder for the the companies that control all these points to ignore somebody like PointsPath. So
Yeah.
the problem is Julian's too nice of a guy. So good thing he's got you barking in his ear.
All right, well let's transition to the story that we'll share in the show notes. You sent me a link to this, and it's an Axios story titled "AI may have just had its iPhone moment." And for folks that may not have been paying attention, Apple had their worldwide developer conference this past week, and as part of that, they announced their first major push into the AI world with a partnership with OpenAI and some interesting novel announcements on things that your iPhone will do soon. Talk to me about how you felt about this when it came out, Paul. I'm curious why you tagged this story specifically. I absolutely have some thoughts on it, but I'm curious where your head is on this.
Well, I think that, one of the things we've talked about in the context of AI over probably the last year now is really that it seems like a very interesting technology, but
Hmm.
until it sort of abstracts itself away into a solution that feels normal,
Hmm.
it's not going to really get big. So, for example, my mom, is not going to be interested in using AI. It's scary. It's different. She's got her
Right.
set ways or whatever, but she does use Siri. She does
Yep.
use Alexa. She does use these things. So I guess where I'm going with this is that like, in the early days of relational databases, everybody talked about relational databases, but eventually what we all now have realized is that MySQL and Oracle and all these database companies make billions of dollars, but nobody really talks about it at the end user level.
Right.
On the flip side, think about blockchain. Man, everybody talked about blockchain, right? But for whatever reason, blockchain could never find its actual use case outside of crypto.
Right.
AI, I think, was kind of in this weird middle ground where, like, I think it's gotten enough buzz where maybe, you know, sales reps and copywriters were paying $20 a month to use the product. But I think these latest announcements from Apple give you a real taste of what it could look like if the technology just totally abstracts itself away. One of the examples they gave that I thought was really fascinating was, you could talk to the phone and say, "What time does my mom's flight arrive?" And then
Right.
it would cross-reference across text messages, email, and whatever to tell you that answer. That's really, really powerful. Because that all of a sudden you've abstracted away. You don't know how it works. You don't care that it works. And I think so when we think about the iPhone moment, it's one of those things where, you and I, so I still live in the area where I lived back when the iPhone came out. And I remember I was perfectly fine with my BlackBerry Pearl at the time.
Oh man, I love the BlackBerry.
I didn't think I needed anything. And then, my friends started getting iPhones and I started noticing how they were able to like play music and, surf the web and do all these things. And so all of a sudden I was like, oh, let me do this. And anyway, the point is though, is that it became ubiquitous. And I think that's where we're going. So anyway, ramble, ramble, ramble. The point is that I think we might be getting to that point now where jargon like LLM and ML and AI and all these things sort of disappears into the realm of like the engineering departments on how it works. But if you think about what Apple did there, they sort of rebranded AI to Apple Intelligence.
Right. Right.
And which I think is a very interesting kind of way to like, make it more, I don't know, seem more accessible to the non-technical person that probably doesn't listen to something like this. So I just think the use cases, the fact is they didn't talk about, I'll summarize it by saying that the way that Apple talked about this was a masterclass in marketing, product marketing, where they didn't really talk about large language models. They didn't do any of that stuff. They just gave you examples. What time does mom's flight arrive? What time is this? How does that work? What was the latest podcast my wife sent me?
Yeah.
These are all things that at some point all of us have wondered about. And like just think about what you and I did in the pre-show. what do we do every week? We scroll back in our list of texts
Mm-hmm.
and figure out what we texted about.
Right.
And the easiest way now to do that is like if you click that little eye, it has a little links section.
Yep.
But, you know, I could theoretically just with iOS 18, in theory, I'd be able to just walk as I'm walking down to my desk. I could just talk into my AirPods and say, "Hey, what did Ed text me last week, or what links did Ed text me last week, or what did I text him?" And it just reads the subject or the headlines. You know, that's where it gets really, really powerful. Because I don't know about you, we have a couple of Alexas in the house.
Yep.
Dots and stuff that we've acquired over the years. They suck. The only thing we use them for is for timers. I mean, that's really it.
That's
to
pretty
turn
much all they're
lights.
good for.
That's all they're good for, But this could be the first time voice search and voice sort of interaction with computers could start to move forward in a big way.
Yeah, there's really not much I disagree with there. I'm going to take a slightly different tact on this, this announcement, and I think I don't want to say that I feel like AI has been underwhelming so far. I mean, I don't know, call it a year or two in at this point, but while I've seen some incredible things, including the AI video production product that we talked about at one point that OpenAI has, Soros or whatever it's called, like there's some incredible stuff out there, but the use case has been challenging for me to wrap my arms around. So, I'm not one of those folks paying a monthly subscription for any of these services right now, and I also can't really think of a good way to use them in my business. But as we've talked about in the show, I use AI in my business. We have an AI phone service that answers the phones at Five Guys to take your phone order. So I'm not anti-AI, but I think, I struggle to find business applications. And, the example of using AI in my restaurants to take food orders, I think ties very closely with this announcement from Apple. And I think I said to you in text something when you sent me the story, something along the lines of, this further reinforces my belief that what's most interesting to me about AI are small language models. We talk a lot about LLMs, large language models, and I think part of the problem I have with those is that, remember when OpenAI first came out and then Bard came out afterwards, and it was like, well, OpenAI is searching on data up through 2019, but Bard has 2023, and then, ChatGPT 4 came out, and now it's through 2022, and I was trying to figure out what was actually contained in the model so I knew what it was trained on. Whereas to your point about, hey, what time does my mom's flight land? It's a small language model. It's only my information. It has figured out who my mom is, either because of my contacts or I call her mom in chats or whatever. But all of that stuff folds together into a small language model that's very valuable to me. And I'll give you an example of it. You mentioned about, finding articles that were in text for the show, but I'll go one better. Hey Siri, or whatever they're going to call it in the future, can you look back through the Results Junkies shows and can you send me the clip when Paul and I talked about the company that we found in Taos, New Mexico back in 2015? How long would it take you or I to do that? But it knows my podcast, and it's a much smaller model, and so I know the information it should have, and so I know that if it returns a result to me, going all the way back to your example, what time does my mom's flight land? It should give me a very accurate answer for that question, and I think that's where I see the value in this sort of a model, is because it's smaller and because I know the information it should have. I feel like, me personally, I'm much more going to trust the result I get. And if my trust level is high, I'm more likely to use it.
Well, I think, okay, so there's probably some data scientists listening to this that is way smarter than you and
Siri
I.
just tried to start talking to me.
Yeah, there's probably some data scientists listening to this and making fun of both of us. But I would say I don't know that I agree with you, because I think we're talking about two slightly different things here. So when we think about large language models, and I think kind of what you're referring to is the two parts of it: how long they take to build in terms of compute time, and then how much memory they require to be stored locally. And then there's actually a third part of like what data they have access to. So here's the thing, like, I don't actually even know how much RAM is on my iPhone 15 or whatever this thing is. I think it's like 128 gigs. Maybe it's 256. I have no idea.
And to be clear, like the memory and all that stuff, I don't really care about. Well, more what I care about is just, I don't know what information is in the model.
Right. And I guess where I'm going with this is that, like, So for machine learning to work, we can use all this, you can talk about LLMs, AI, all this stuff. For machine learning to work, you fundamentally need two things. You need access to training data. And then once that model is trained, you need access to whatever data, like in this case, access to my email, access to my texts and all that to figure out, okay, Ed is a friend, Dana's my wife, my kids'
Hmm.
names are, whatever.
Hmm.
And so I think what's going to be really fascinating here, I don't know that I can like disagree with you on large language versus small language. I guess I would just say that I think that the larger the models are, the fewer mistakes they tend to make. I mean, you can actually go on, so there's actually, for people that don't know this, if you go to huggingface.co, you can actually look at a lot of these models and actually download them or request access to them to test them if you have enough RAM and stuff like that on your machines. And what you generally find as you start to benchmark across these things is that generally speaking, the larger the model, the slower it runs, depending on your compute capacity, but the lower the error rate is on the answers, which probably doesn't mean much to most people. But if I ask what time my mom's flight is landing and it makes the mistake, if it makes a mistake and says, well, she's landing at 7, but realistically she's landing at 9, I just wasted 2 hours at the airport and I lose trust in this thing.
You did, but also too, I don't think that it's a large language model or a massive database to figure out what time your mom's flight is landing. It needs to know who your mom is, which comes from your device and your contacts, and then it needs access to flight data. Like I don't view that as a I don't view that. To be clear, you could do that with a large language model, but then you would need to tell it. You need to tell each of those LLMs who your mom is. In theory, what I think Apple is doing here is there's going to be some level of inference because you might have mom listed in your phone as mom or whatever. Like there's going to be connections that it can make that, quite frankly, ChatGPT 4, 5, 6, 7 aren't going to have that because they don't have access to your contacts. So they don't know who your mom is. Now, if you told them, hey, can you tell me what time United 2347 is landing at Dulles? Of course it can provide you that information. But the question you're asking is you don't remember what airline your mom is flying. You don't remember what time she lands. So give me the simplest question and give me the best answer. And that's where I think, like you would need to give, in theory, based on where I think Apple is going with this, if you were to try to ask that question in ChatGPT 4, you'd need to give it more inputs. You would need to tell it who your mom was, and then you would probably need to give it access to some sort of a data set that you had on your phone, or you would need to tell the model she's flying United and this is her flight number, or she's flying United from San Francisco and I think she lands after 5 p.m. Like you'd have to give it more parameters to take this big database and narrow it down. Whereas if it is a small model, it's saying, okay, figure out who my mom is, something that's hard for ChatGPT 4 to have information on. Look in my email for the email mom sent me, and I know you're not saying this, but like this is what it's inferring. Look in my email, mom sent me her flight confirmation, and then go Google or search for when that flight is supposed to land. The only thing that really needs to go out to any sort of a database is the check what time my flight needs to land. All the other pieces happen in a database that you haven't exposed publicly.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the one thing that we can agree on, whether it's large language, small language, or whatever, is that the utility goes up in a massive way if I can start to ask very small questions like this that cause a lot of friction in our day-to-day life. You know,
I think the value
um,
goes up for me for sure, and it sounds like for you. I certainly understand why others would want different versions. I think for me, what I'm starting to see is that the smaller model, the being able to answer the more precise questions, are things that I would pay for.
yeah. I mean, well, yeah. I mean, I think I've said to you on a previous show, so I'm a paying user for Superhuman, the mail
Right?
client.
Yep.
And one of the AI features I love is that it summarizes every email right there at the top and tells me
Hmm.
what the gist of it is.
Right.
It then does that for the entire thread. It now even, provides me with 3 pre-written scripts that I can select from as starting points for my replies. So it reduces a lot of friction. But like for example, let's think about you and I. You text me or I text you. One of us texts each other each week and says, "How's a certain day looking like for you to record?" Well, what do you and I do? Like there's a ton of little micro actions that happen when that happens. So I know for
Right.
me, when you text me, I immediately open my calendar app.
Sure.
And then I mentally tell you, or then oh, okay, here's this, da da da. Then I text it back to you. But what if iOS 18 actually starts to give me like a draft that I could say, when you respond, it gives me a draft that says you're open X, Y, and Z. Do you want to just hit send?
Yeah.
It sounds so trivial probably to people listening, but where I think AI is going to shine in the long term is reducing lots of that little friction. And that's going to be really fascinating. That's why I think it's the iPhone moment. So iOS 18 is going to be really fascinating for everybody.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. And just because I want to end on a triggering note, and we'll save the YC thing for next week. Has Superhuman gone away from this concept of everything has to be threaded conversations in email, or would I still be stuck using it if I jump back in?
I think it's still threaded.
You let me know when because I'm never like I know you strongly disagree with me, but I'm just never ever gonna go back to trying threaded email. I'm not there.
So you just like each email in the thread to be its own at the top level of the inbox.
Yep. And my inbox is a big, hot cesspool of emails. I get it, but my brain just does not work with threading.
I mean, I would imagine they could do something like that, but I don't know.
I signed up for it a few years ago, and they said we believe, like, this is what we believe, and this is the way we're gonna, keep it for now, and maybe we'll roll that feature out someday. But yeah, they never did. Well, at least the last time I checked. So there you go.
People can say a lot of things about you, and to add to
do.
that list, it's you do email weird.
I do. Yeah, people say a lot of things about me for sure.
So,
all right, man. Well, it was good catching up with you. I would definitely want to talk about this YC thing next week, and I do promise to roll out some of the memes that we've got coming in.
I love it, man. All right, have a great rest of the week, and I'm sorry we missed last week, everybody, but hopefully that will not happen again for another 3 years.
Boys are back in town. There you go.
The boys are back in town. There you go.